What's up everybody, so today this video going to react to a JTVideos Rebooted MCU PS7 Part 7, thank God, check. I'm done. Yeah, so today is a part set, so today we're going to react to part set JTVideos Rebooted MCU PS7 I call X-Men Onslaught, yeah. So today we're going to react to that X-Men Onslaught. So today that's the last one, and then tomorrow will be in 5 ones. So that's the last one, and tomorrow in 5 ones. So anyway, so 1, 2, 3 reaction.
Everyone, and welcome back to Rebooted MCU. Today we're here with Rebooted MCU Phase 7 Part 7, which really covers the 9th project of Phase 7. But I'm not going to waste any time, let's go ahead and jump in to the project. Phase 7 Part 9 is X-Men Onslaught, and it takes place in Universe 2034. The project opens in Ottawa, Canada, but not the Ottawa of the main 0139 rebooted MCU universe, but Universe 696. The land is filled with partially destroyed houses, barren fields, and empty streets. We cut inside the Parliament building as we hear a man scream, "15 billion already?" As we see Canadian Prime Minister Gary Cody, played by Martin Short, slam his fist on the long table in front of him as he berates an unknown man sitting across from him. He tells the man that he understands the life tax has already become due, but that the people of Canada have paid the tax for the last 6 years, and the huge bill has dried up not only the Canadian budget, but their natural resources as well. Cody gets on the ground and begs for the man to recognize the hard work of the Canadian people and spare them for not being able to fully pay the tax this time around. The unknown man scoffs, saying that in his line of work, pity is a tool for the weak. The man stands, saying that Cody knows what will come of his land and thanks him for all the money he gave over the years. As the man exits, Cody shouts at him, saying that the name Essex will be spread around the depths of hell when he dies. This is when the unknown man, revealed to be Nathaniel Essex, played by Henry Cavill, takes out a walkie-talkie and says that it is time for the show to begin. Essex hits a button on his watch and suddenly disappears as we see Cody running throughout the Parliament building until reaching his office and hitting a button that sounds an alarm that calls Canada's primary fighting force, Alpha Flight, to action. He watches the silhouettes of Alpha Flight take stand in front of the building as Essex watches the city below in the comfort of a private plane. A smile forms across his face as he shouts, "Now!" as we see a red light fall over Ottawa, and in a flash, a massive explosion overtakes the land. As the dust settles, nothing remains. Minutes later, we see Essex walking around the destroyed capital city as he holds up a skeleton, one he presumes to be that of Guardian, the leader of Alpha Flight. Essex calls out to a mysterious creature, saying that like always, his destructive capabilities are second to none. As Essex says this, we watch as a crack appears in front of him. And as the crack opens, Essex sees something truly unbelievable. What appears to be a Canada, like his own, but with bustling streets, bountiful fields, and a city filled with people. Essex ponders what the crack might be, but quickly turns to his creature and tells him that the duo have bled their current world dry of all the money and resources they could. In the midst of the chaos, a new opportunity seems to have opened right before their very eyes. Essex laughs and walks through the crack as the title card appears. We cut to New Orleans as we see Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, played by Joseph Quinn, Jean Grey, played by Abigail Cohen, Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, played by Brandon Perea, and Anna Marie, aka Rogue, played by Elizabeth Gillies, walking throughout the back alleys. Cyclops communicates with Hank McCoy, aka Beast, played by John Boyega, via earpiece as they search for a mutant who Professor X has been tracking for months. As the group enters the Carousel Bar and Lounge, they discover the man who they have been searching for. The bartender of the establishment, Remy LeBeau, played by Kelvin Harrison Jr., who operates under the alias Gambit when he commits crimes as a member of the Thieves' Brigade. LeBeau attempts to escape the group using his mutant ability of energy conversion, or converting energy with a dormant object to kinetic energy, allowing it to explode upon contact. While LeBeau is able to dodge Scott, Jean, and Angel, he is taken down by Rogue through her energy absorption powers. Rogue tells the View that Charles has kept up with his career as a criminal within New Orleans, with residents giving him the moniker as the honest and the most deadly card dealer in the Bayou. LeBeau says that he is aware of the X-Men and doesn't agree with their activism, saying that he is a man who follows the beat of his own drum. That if he goes, he'd only be doing so if it meant that he continued to see Rogue's beautiful face. Rogue blushes as Scott calls for Beast to approach the group with the Thunderbird to prepare for boarding. As Beast lands the Thunderbird and opens the hatch, we watch as Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, played by Asher Angel, forms a walkway of ice onto the Thunderbird as Scott, Jean, Warren, Anna, and Remy board. Beast welcomes Remy to the X-Men, with Remy emphasizing that he never agreed to join the team, as Beast flies the Thunderbird back towards the X-Mansion. Inside the X-Mansion at Beast's lab, we see Professor Charles Xavier, played by Giancarlo Esposito, being examined by doctor and girlfriend of Hank, Cecilia Reyes, played by Yaya de Corsa, who examines Charles as Nina Thurman, aka Domino, played by Zazie Beetz, and Wolverine, played by Tom Hardy, sit and watch. After the events of the Coming of Galactus, Charles' health has begun to decrease rapidly, so much so that he now has to have a weekly checkup performed by both Hank and Cecilia. As Charles exits the room in his wheelchair, Wolverine jokes that it's a miracle that he has not kicked the bucket yet. Domino scolds him for the joke. Charles tells Wolverine that he can't die yet, but is also seeking to accomplish his two main goals, truly feeling that he has prepared the next generation of mutants to take his place, and to fulfill his promise he made to Wolverine about learning of his past. Charles closes his eyes and is informed, thanks to telepathic communication with Jean, that the Thunderbird has returned to the X-Mansion. Charles informs Domino and Wolverine of the news and encourages them to both introduce themselves to the new recruit. As the two leave, Charles moves towards his room, as the realization that his days are truly numbered begins to click in. Charles hits a button which lowers a TV screen in the room.
First home feeling. You could go hot pink, celebratory champagne pink, housewarming pink.
Showing the familiar face of Kurt Wagner, aka Nightcrawler, played by Rami Malek. Nightcrawler, along with Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead, have been sent to Alberta, Canada to gather information on the John Howlett estate, an estate Charles believes might have some connection to Wolverine based on his history. Charles asks for an update on the mission, with Nightcrawler saying that they have made some progress, but is shocked Charles is calling about their assignment and not what is transpiring in Ottawa. Charles thanks Nightcrawler and hangs up before turning on the news to see J. Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons, reporting on the mysterious crack that appeared in the skies above Ottawa and had two things enter through: a man and a monster. As Charles looks at the picture of the two beings that entered through the crack, his face turns pale as he recognizes one of them as the man who tortured him when he was a kid. Inside the hall of the X-Mansion, we see Rogue showing Remy around the building as Remy ignores her words and interrupts, saying she is beautiful and gives her the nickname Cher. Scott debriefs Wolverine on the mission, while Jean and Iceman congratulate Angel on his first successful mission back on the team, causing Angel to smile. Suddenly, the jovial mood comes to a halt as Professor X comes charging into the room, with Beast following closely behind, screaming at Charles to calm down and that his heart rate has skyrocketed. The X-Men stand stunned as Charles screams at them to board the Blackbird and prepare to depart, as they are heading for Ottawa immediately. The group all look confused as Professor X closes his eyes and communicates telepathically with Scott, saying, "Scott, I'm at a loss for words, but unless my eyes have deceived me, Sinister has returned." Scott's face turns pale as he turns and screams to the X-Men to board the Blackbird and prepare to take off. We then watch as Scott, Jean, Bobby, Warren, Wolverine, Hank, Nina, Rogue, and Remy, who is being dragged by Rogue, all board the Blackbird with Professor X close behind. Charles closes his eyes and communicates with Pietro Maximoff, aka Quicksilver, played by Evan Peters, to hurry to the Blackbird, as his services will be needed. Outside the mansion, we see Pietro overseeing a kickball game as the Xavier School PE teacher, as he turns to assistant PE teacher Heather Cameron, aka Lifeguard, played by Teresa Palmer, and tells her to take control of the group. He races towards the Blackbird and joins the group as they blast off and make their way towards Ottawa. In Ottawa, we watch as civilians run for their lives as the monster begins destroying the buildings that surround the Parliament building. Inside, we watch as Nathaniel Essex meets with Canadian Prime Minister Scott Gunderberg, played by Bruce Greenwood, and Chief of Defense Heather McNeil, played by Carrie Ann Moss, as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police flank the room. Essex speaks of deja vu, while Gunderberg implores Essex that the Canadian government will provide him with accommodations while they work out his demands, saying that there is no need for bloodshed. Essex notes that he simply needs a place to stay for now, before the chat is interrupted by a mounted officer screaming that an unidentified aircraft has entered the airspace above Ottawa. Essex sighs and exits the room to see the X-Men fighting against his monster. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Wolverine, Angel, Rogue, Quicksilver all attempt to fight off the monster. But not only did their attacks not do anything, but they are rendered useless by the monster's telepathic abilities. Beast lands the Blackbird with both Professor X and Domino staying behind, exiting the ship but hiding away in a partially destroyed building. Gambit sits on the ship but decides to get involved after noticing one of the monster's attacks heading towards an orphanage, using his staff to block the attack and shouting in anger, telling the monster that he wasn't going to get involved, that when he chose to set his sights on potentially harming helpless children, he can no longer stay neutral. Despite the additional help from Gambit, we watch as the X-Men fall, in total defeat. Essex exits Parliament to gaze upon the defeated soldiers, talking to himself and daydreaming about the prospect of the X-Gene actually being awakened in this odd new world. Professor X communicates with Jean and Beast telepathically, telling them to retreat to the Blackbird and regroup, saying that he and Domino will remain here for now and find their way home. While Jean and Beast initially protest this idea, Charles snaps at them to hurry, prompting Jean to rally the others back to the Blackbird as Beast takes off towards the X-Mansion. Essex tells his monster not to destroy the plane as he wants to study the individuals that fought against him at a later date, before laughing and returning to the Prime Minister as Professor X and Domino watch on from the building. That evening inside the X-Mansion, we see the X-Men resting while their wounds are attended to by Beast and Cecilia Reyes. While the group have their wounds attended to, they meet to discuss the battle earlier that day along with Aurora Monroe, aka Storm, played by Zoe Kravitz, who joins the group via monitor from Wakanda. The conversation starts with Jean asking Storm if she has finally picked out her dress for the big day. But this is quickly cut off by Scott, who voices his frustration about the day, saying that regardless of what the team did, none of their attacks appeared to work on the monster. Angel asks Storm if Shuri managed to take a look at the data Beast sent over, revealing that while the group fought, Beast managed to extract data from the monster thanks to debris left behind on Rogue's gloves. Gambit rolls his eyes and tells the group that defeats like this are what happens when people attempt to concern themselves with international affairs, which Wolverine snarls that Gambit appeared to be pretty invested in the situation when the orphanage got attacked. Gambit and Wolverine stand prepared to fight as Storm is joined on the monitor by the Princess of Wakanda, Shuri, played by Letitia Wright, who informs the group that she ran a diagnostic on the debris and was able to figure out what the armor worn by the monster was made of, but says the findings are difficult to comprehend, saying that the armor appears to be made of an alloy consisting of vibranium, tungsten, and adamantium, the three strongest metals in the world. The group sits stunned as Angel asks Shuri if she has ever seen an alloy like this before, something she denies, saying that this combination is so advanced it's almost beyond earthly means of creation. This is when Beast makes a startling discovery, stating that at the battlefield his energy monitor spiked to a degree that he had never seen before, which prompted Beast to notice what he believed to be a rift. Beast explains that a rift forms a tiny tear between two universes, a tear that can spawn at any time and at any location. But to his knowledge, is only theoretically possible if the stability of space and time have completely become unstable. Scott turns to Beast to ask him if he actually thinks something like that could happen, prompting Beast to reveal that he believed the monster came directly into our universe from a different universe. We cut inside an empty warehouse just outside of Ottawa as we see Essex lounging on the floor when suddenly his monster jumps on its feet and fires a massive psionic energy blast at the entrance of the building. Essex snaps at the monster as it tells him that he sensed something entering the building, and as the dust clears from the explosion, we see Professor X and Domino walking towards the duo. Essex stands stunned, asking how someone managed to survive a blast from his monster, to which Professor X responds that it must be luck. Essex stands, lost in thought, as Professor X reveals that he is aware of who Essex is. The memory of his face is burned into Charles' head since he was a kid. Essex nods, accepting the fact that he truly traveled to a different universe through a rift in space and time, and that he remembered Brian always being fascinated with the multiverse. Charles screams at Essex, telling him to keep his father's name out of his mouth, which shocks Essex, who says that he is aware of who Charles is, but that his presence here doesn't make any sense. Charles inquires as to why, prompting Essex to tell him not to read his mind, as he wouldn't want to spoil the story of Nathaniel Essex and his history with two mutants named Charles and Eric. Nathaniel Essex of Universe 696 was a man obsessed with two things: genetics and his appearance. A seemingly otherworldly intellect would allow him to attend the prestigious Oxford University, where he would make two lifelong friends. Aldrich Killian, played by Kirk Fox, a man who suffered from several debilitating physical disabilities and sought to create an elixir to heal his condition, and Brian Xavier, played by Michael Beach, who was interested in child psychology. While the three would become close friends, Essex would have his life change forever when he discovered something during one of his research courses, an inactive gene that Essex theorized could result in a mutation capable of changing humanity as a whole, which he aptly named the X gene. 20 years after graduation, Essex would found the Essex Corporation in New York City and begin studying orphans and anyone who agreed to take part in his clinical studies. His findings suggested that only some people had the dormant X gene inside of them, but this research came at a cost, as Essex quickly came on the verge of bankruptcy. Seeking help, Essex called both Killian, who had successfully invented the Extremis formula, which aided the human body in healing all physical injuries, making millions in the process, and Xavier, who started a family of his own and became a lecturer at Bard College. Essex told the group that he had one final idea for his genetic research, and that if they both helped him out, they could be on the brink of uncovering a scientific breakthrough that could change the field of science for decades. The two friends agreed to help, with Killian funneling millions of dollars for the research, while Xavier offered his teenage son, Charles, to take part in Essex's new clinical trial. Unfortunately for Brian, he'd be kept in the dark as to the horrors that soon awaited both his son and the world. Essex would soon discover that Charles not only had the X gene, but discovered that not all genes are created equal, as Charles' genetic potential was seemingly off the charts. Essex theorized that awakening the X gene could be done through experiences of intense emotion and traumatic events. This resulted in the torture of Charles Xavier. Every day, Charles would be strapped to a chair and have his legs broken through the use of metal clubs by both Essex and Killian. Charles would often faint from the pain, while other times the pain was so intense he found himself unable to breathe. When Charles' legs were completely shattered, Killian would administer Extremis to Charles, healing his legs. After Killian would extract the Extremis, the cycle would continue. This torture would last for 2 months, with Brian none the wiser, as Essex would threaten Charles with Brian's life if he ever found out about what happened during their clinical research. Eventually, Brian found out when he accidentally arrived at the Essex clinic earlier than expected, and was shot by Essex and killed, prompting Xavier's psionic and telepathic abilities to awaken. Thrilled by this discovery, something else awakened inside Essex that day. He was not only obsessed with his genetics and his looks, but also with the idea of domination. With this thought in his head, Essex forced Charles to use his abilities to locate someone with exceptional genetic potential through the use of his powers. And if he refused, Essex would find and kill his mother. Xavier was forced to comply, resulting in the discovery of another mutant who housed extreme genetic potential in Germany, a kid by the name of Eric Lenscher. Essex would travel to Germany and meet both Eric and his mother, Edie Lenscher, played by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and would offer them refuge in the United States if Eric agreed to take part in the clinical trial. Seeking to escape anti-Semitism in Germany at the time, Edie agreed, and the duo would begin their new life in the United States. However, this was short-lived, as during the first day of the trial, Essex would shoot and kill Edie in front of Eric, causing his powers of magnetism to awaken. This is when Essex changed course. Thanks to his lust for power, he envisioned the potential of a being that housed both the powers of Xavier and Lenscher, one capable of everything and anything, and being truly unstoppable. Using a cadaver given to Essex by Killian, Essex would formulate a device capable of absorbing both the life and powers from the boys, and successfully transferred both their powers and life into the cadaver, killing the two young men in the process. With this monster on his side, Essex would plant a chip inside both his head and the head of the monster, granting Essex mental control over him. His conquest for power would start in Washington, D.C., where he demanded that President Richard Nixon name him the top scientist in the United States. When he refused, the monster blew up the White House and the Capitol building.
Food's here, but your phone's there. What's more important than your education, Sushi? Panini? Jambalaya?
It's a Mac.
Damn
I can just mirror my phone from here.
Oh, glad we learned something.
You could get a quote in under 2 minutes. Join the 3 million who got temporary insurance and get on the road.
Ending America as we know it, paving the way for the Essex Corp to become the ruling judge, jury, and executioner on the massive land formerly known as the United States. Essex would demand that all other countries pay him a life tax of $15 billion per year for the benefit of living in his world. Many countries fought back against Essex, but their armies were wiped out by his monster, allowing the monster to gather elements such as vibranium, adamantium, and tungsten through his conquest to form a suit of armor capable of making him, in the minds of many, invincible. All those who failed to pay the life tax found themselves in the grave, which led to the world giving the monster a name that perfectly encapsulated what he brought to the world: Onslaught, played by Viggo Mortensen. As Essex finishes his stories, Xavier begins sobbing while Domino throws up from the graphic nature of the story. Essex tells Xavier that the Canadian government offered him refuge here for the next day, while he figures out how he will begin dismantling this universe as well, but tells Xavier that he can't have him poking around and foiling his plans. However, as Onslaught stands and prepares to kill Xavier and Domino, he hits his head on the top of the ceiling, causing part of the building to collapse, allowing Xavier and Domino to escape. Xavier tells Domino that she should stay in Ottawa and wait for the others, as he has a feeling that they will return at any time. But he, on the other hand, will need to acquire an aircraft and travel to Iowa. Back at the X-Mansion, Scott mentions to the group that if the monster is really from a different universe, then it would explain why the professor thought he saw Essex with the monster. Pietro shudders at the name Essex, while Beast theorizes that if Essex is truly here, it would mean that his monster is likely a mutant. Scott then says that if the monster is in fact a mutant, Rogue's ability should still be able to weaken the monster regardless of its strength, recalling her bout with Apocalypse. Wolverine agrees, but says that nothing will work unless they are capable of allowing Rogue to get into contact with the skin of the monster, a task that seems unlikely thanks to its armor. Shuri tells the group that while the alloy itself is not impossible to break, it is improbable, but mentions that if the group found a way to focus all of their energy on one portion of the armor, their combined power could allow them to destroy a piece of it. Scott tells Shuri that he doesn't need to hear anything else, and that the group will begin formulating a plan to give Rogue an entrance to weaken the monster, which will open up a path of victory. With the fate of the world at stake, this is their best bet to protect it. Scott leads the group into the danger room for training, while Gambit stays back to ask Pietro what kind of man this Essex person was, a man that Pietro calls a bully. Hearing this, Gambit follows Quicksilver to the danger room and joins the group's efforts in preparing to take down the monster. We cut to Iowa early the next morning as we see Eric Lencher, aka Magneto, played by Jason Isaacs, working on his farm. As he finishes checking on his plants and walks towards his home, he watches as he slowly notices Charles sitting on his porch. Eric tells Charles that it isn't polite for him to show up unannounced, prompting Charles to tell Eric that he had to use his telepathic powers to mentally control a pilot to bring him here, saying that there was a world-ending calamity on the horizon. Eric sits on a swing next to Charles, recounting the events of the birth of the Scarlet Witch, and informing Charles that he has given up on his idea of a utopia, saying that Charles was right to view people as simply good or evil, and not to make a distinction between non-mutant and mutant. Charles asks Eric if he firmly believes in this change of heart, something Eric agrees with. Charles tells Eric that he has a chance to prove that good will prevail over evil, explaining the backstory of Essex and how in a different universe, both Charles and Eric were killed for their powers. Eric sits stunned as Charles emphasizes that the threat this monster poses as a result of their powers is astronomical, and that Charles has accepted that he will not be capable of carrying out his ideals much longer due to his age and frailty, but tells Eric that perhaps, as their final parting gift to the next generation, they can show them what happens when people put their differences aside to accomplish something great. Eric walks inside but continues to listen to Charles, who explains that while the X-Men were originally formed to protect humanity against evil mutants and show that mutants and humans can coexist, they were also formed to cultivate the next generation of mutant leaders, to instill in them the ideals of what it takes to not only be a good human, but also a good mutant. As Charles finishes, Eric exits his home, donning his original outfit from X-Men Origins, as he smiles at Charles, saying that they can both agree that good needs to prevail and evil needs to fail. That instead of preaching it, he thinks a good final gift to the next generation would be to practice what the duo preaches. Charles smiles as Eric uses his magnetism to lift both he and Charles into the air, as Charles directs Eric towards Ottawa. We cut to see the Blackbird flying back to Ottawa as Beast pilots the craft. He commends Scott for pulling the team together and managing to come up with a strategy to defeat the monster. Scott thanks Beast before telling the team to rest up, as the fight of their lives is a mere hours away. We see Bobby, Warren, Jean, and Pietro all fall asleep, Wolverine smoking a Cohiba, and Rogue sitting quietly next to Gambit. Rogue finally breaks the silence, asking Gambit what made him decide to get involved with the team, especially after he was so adamant against helping out. Gambit then reveals that when he was 5 years old, both of his parents joined the armed forces and died overseas fighting the conflict between two foreign nations that the United States decided to interfere with. He was placed in an orphanage where he would interact with other kids who lost their parents. When Remy would begin attending school, he found that many of his fellow orphans would be bullied and ridiculed over their status as an orphan. Remy found himself constantly getting into fights, not out of a desire to fight, but out of a duty to protect his fellow orphan. This would result in Remy beating up Thorine Morceau, who turned out to be a member of the Thieves Guild. While they would initially seek revenge against Remy, they eventually recognized his talent, giving him a home, training him, and allowing him to continue protecting his brothers and sisters at the orphanage while working for the guild. Remy tells Rogue that he is not a man who easily finds purpose in things, but is always ready to step up if he feels someone needs help. Rogue smiles, telling Gambit that she is a sucker for a man with a sweet heart. As Gambit blushes, Beast informs the group to be prepared as they were about to land.
Skincare? We've got better things to do.
It's easy. Nivea Men Sensitive Moisturizer. Best.
We then watch as Essex approaches the apartment building with Onslaught. Growing tired of waiting, his bloodlust has hit a tipping point and he is ready to begin the implementation of the life tax. Before he can make his way to the top and enter the building, the Blackbird arrives and the X-Men leap into action, with Domino reuniting with the group. We watch as Quicksilver dashes around with Domino on his back, working with Angel to distract Onslaught. While they do, Scott and Jean focus their efforts on blasting part of Onslaught's armor near his knee. Following this, we watch as Iceman freezes the ground near Onslaught as Beast and Angel both ram into Onslaught, causing him to slip on the ice and fall over. Wolverine leaps into action, using his claws to rip at the part of Onslaught's armor that has been weakened. However, Essex commands Onslaught to get his act together, forcing him to stand and seemingly foiling the group's plan, until suddenly a large metal beam strikes the area, breaking the metal and impaling Onslaught's leg. Gambit apologizes to the group, telling them that his kinetic abilities take a little bit longer on larger objects. This prompts Rogue to remove her gloves and grab the exposed area of Onslaught's leg, as the X-Men begin barraging the monster with attacks. Essex screams at Onslaught repeatedly, telling him to get his act together, prompting Onslaught to unleash a massive sonic blast that knocks out the entire group. As the X-Men lay unconscious, we watch as Magneto and Professor X land in Ottawa. Charles closes his eyes and telepathically communicates to Scott, saying that he has no idea if he can hear him or not, but that if Charles does not manage to walk away from the battle, it was an honor watching him grow into the man who will lead the next generation of mutants. Charles turns and nods to Magneto as we slowly start to see pieces of metal and metallic debris begin floating in air. Essex looks around confused as suddenly watches a metallic chip used by Essex to control Onslaught is ripped from his head, causing blood to flow down Essex's face as he begins to scream in pain. Eric turns to Charles and says that it appears the chip controlling Onslaught has been removed, prompting Charles to telepathically speak with Onslaught. Charles tells Onslaught that Essex no longer has control over him, and he can now choose to live freely. Onslaught seems bewildered by the thought, saying that he has never been free to choose anything in his life, and doesn't know what he should do. Charles tells him that perhaps he can reverse the role he has been playing and use his extraordinary power for good. Onslaught looks down, saying that regardless of what he does, it will only be a matter of time before someone like Essex comes along again and places him in chains once more, meaning that it might be better to cement himself at the top before someone else can beat him to it. As Charles is snapped to reality, he sees a faint flash of Eric exuding from Onslaught. Charles enters communication with Onslaught as Eric asks how it went. Before Charles can speak, he watches Onslaught stomps on Essex, killing him, leaving nothing but a pool of blood and broken bone. Onslaught shouts, launching a massive sonic blast, and claiming that he is now the master of all who inhabit the planet. As the dust clears, we see that Magneto protected the duo from the blast by surrounding them in a protective coating of scrap metal. Charles turns to Eric, feeling defeated, saying that Onslaught reacted to his plea like a caged animal who had been freed and now fears capture once again. Eric begins floating in air as Charles nervously asks what he is planning. Eric smiles, telling Charles to follow his lead and don't second guess anything. We then watch as Eric attempts to crush the armor worn by Onslaught, but even with his mutation, the metal appears to be too powerful for even Magneto to crush. Magneto floats around Onslaught, who throws punches at him while Charles uses his telepathic powers to cause Onslaught confusion. As Eric eventually begins throwing large pieces of scrap metal at Onslaught, Onslaught gains an opening and grabs Eric, crushing his skeleton as Charles watches in horror. Charles screams for Eric, while Eric tells Charles not to give up on the plan. As Charles continues to use his telepathic abilities with little success, Eric reflects back on his battle with Chthon, where he instilled his new belief in both Wanda and Pietro, that there is not a difference between humanity and mutants, but a difference between humans and mutants who choose to do good, and humans and mutants who choose to do bad. Blood falls from Eric's mouth as Onslaught asks Eric what he hoped to accomplish with such mediocre power. Eric smiles, telling Onslaught that before he chooses to throw around insults, he should remember Eric's title is the Master of Magnetism. Using all of his remaining power, Eric finally manages to crush Onslaught under his armor, prompting Onslaught to release Eric as the two crash towards the ground. As the dust clears and the X-Men awaken, Pietro runs to his father and begins to cry as the result of the battle is made clear. While good won the day, both the monster Onslaught and the good mutant Magneto died in battle. The project ended.
Magneto dead. Come on, guys. There they go.
A couple days later, as the X-Men all pay their respects at the grave of Magneto, who is buried in a lot on his Iowa farm.
Hello, Manny.
Hello, Derek.
Special bond.
As the X-Men pay their respects to Magneto, we watch as both Professor X and Quicksilver approach the grave, placing both Magneto's helmet and the chessboard he and Charles used to use in front of his grave. Inside the home, we see J. Jonah Jameson reporting on the events of the week, discussing the monster who attacked the Canadian government and the mutant who defeated him. Jameson reports that the mutant who defeated the monster is none other than Eric Lenscher, the same mutant who famously stood outside the White House in protest of the Mutant Registration Act and called for mutants to take over power from humanity. Jameson notes that while it is rare for people to change, he can't help but imagine that the same man who once wanted humans below mutants, choosing to sacrifice himself to protect humans from a monster, is the perfect representation of how far the world has come in accepting others. Closing the segment by saying that if one mutant can change his thoughts on humanity, then there is no excuse for anyone in the world to harbor prejudicial thoughts, and should look to him as a shining example of how to change. As the broadcast ends, we are finally given a look at Magneto's gravestone, which reads, Eric Lenscher, amazing father, amazing mutant, good person, hero of all. In the first post-credit scene, we see Kate Bishop, played by Haley Steinfeld, and Barbara Barton, aka Mockingbird, played by Linda Cardellini, sitting in the living room of an unknown house. Barbara tells Kate that she's retiring from the life of crime fighting, but has a gift for her. As Kate opens the gift, it is revealed to be Hawkeye's bow. prompting Barbara to tell Kate that it is up to her to carry on Hawkeye's legacy. In the second post-credit scene, we see Wolverine enter Charles' office as Charles reveals that Nightcrawler and Colossus were able to help Charles keep his word to Wolverine, uncovering that while he came from the powerful Howlett family, he was incidentally raised by the family groundskeeper Thomas Logan. Charles reveals that the records indicate that a young boy by the name of James Howlett went missing from the family, who Charles believes to be Wolverine. Charles asks Wolverine if he wants to be called James from now on, but Wolverine declines, saying that while his brain was fried during the Weapon X experiment, for some reason he feels that being called Logan has a nice ring to it. And that is X-Men Onslaught.
That's the X-Men Onslaught from a JTVideos Rebooted MCU 7, but tomorrow will be in video 1, so yes. So hope you enjoy the video, mention and thumbs up and subscribe, and can I believe we lost the man, yeah. So I'll see you tomorrow, bye bye.